Today we're going to cover the topic of protein. I think it's a topic that's always so important for people, particularly as you get older. And depending on what type of diet you're on, it's very important to understand the implications of having enough protein. So I'm going to bring in Martin. Martin, you're very welcome today. How are you?
Pleasure to be here. Great, Jamie. Thank you. Yes.
Cool. So we're going to make this nice, short. We'll attempt to make it nice, short, and sweet. We're gonna stick to around about half an hour. But really, just to introduce the topic, Martin. Obviously, protein has so many vital roles to play in the body, and I think people underestimate. And based on maybe information that we get in the media, I think people have substituted out a lot of their protein sources maybe for other types of food. So maybe if we give a rundown of the importance of protein, how it's made up, the building blocks, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, protein is what you're made of, Jamie. The fat only sits inside the protein, as it were, and any carbohydrate that happens to be in the body, and there is some, is attached to the protein in some form or another, or is in a protein structure. So not only is the body made of protein, but it runs on protein to a large extent as well. Now, not to dismiss the role of fats in terms of hormones and brain activity, but even structure. But basically, the body is made of protein and runs on protein. Your enzymes and the messengers in the cells are largely protein-based, and they're amino acid-based as well. So proteins and amino acids in abundance supports both the structure and the function of the body.
So when you're looking at the structure of protein, obviously the building blocks being amino acids, what is it that people need to know about amino acids, essentially?
The classic information is that proteins come in complete protein form and incomplete protein. Now, there's not a strict dividing line between these, but complete protein have more of what's called the essential amino acids. Jamie, we discussed the 40 essential nutrients previously, and amino acids are among them. There are 9 amino acids which are actually essential to the body. You cannot make them up. And other amino acids your own body will make up from the 9 essential ones. So you have to consume these amino acids every single day. And there's a minimum amount of each of these amino acids that you must get in order not to enter a decline and eventually die. Now, the minimum amount is often used as the basis for deciding how much protein a person needs to eat. But there are issues around that, as we'll discuss later on. The actual amount of protein you need can vary with what sort of a person you are, what age you are, and how much exercise you do, and all sorts of other factors to do with are you under stress, are you ill, are you in various other conditions and states that may occur to people as they go through their life. Now, the amino acids then are, these 8 essential amino acids are required to form the tissues and to form the active molecules, the enzymes that run your cells. So protein then is the fundamental. In fact, the word protein, as far as I know, means fundamental substance.
Okay. So that sort of comes obviously from its origin. So yeah, when we're discussing protein, we're explaining to people in the gym, it's very much, we say it's literally the amino acids are the building blocks of life. So everything from your skin, hair, nails, muscle tissues, digestive enzymes, neurotransmitters, even your immune system, as we've discussed in previous talks, all require amino acids. So what generally, I suppose if we look at maybe the quantity first, so what are the general guidelines for protein quantity?
The basic issue around protein comes under the heading both of quality and quantity.
Yeah.
And quality is what we mentioned a minute ago, that there are, in the old classification, if you want to put it that way, the first class proteins and the second class proteins. The second class proteins are characterized by the fact that they may be very low in one or more of the essential amino acids.
Right.
While the first class proteins have a high level of all the essential amino acids as a general statement. Yeah. And proteins can be given a score or a number based on how well they fit the description of a perfect protein.
Okay.
For instance, meat would come in at about 67 out of 100, whereas eggs comes in about 95 out of 100. But you'll find that something like bread only comes in at about 43 out of 100. Depending on the kind of bread, it can vary. So there's a score and a rating, and at the top end we have the first class proteins, and then all the rest are in some form or another second class. Now the trick, of course, that we learn is that you can combine second class proteins, you can combine them to make a first class protein. And that is a successful strategy. You can combine beans and rice, or beans and corn, beans and wheat, beans and bread, peanut butter and bread, and all of that makes a complete protein, because they come from different classes of foods. So they're the issues. But with that strategy of protein combining, it's very hard to get to a high quantity of protein overall in the diet, because there are many, many other calories in terms of other nutrients in all of those foods. So the question then is the quantity at that point.
Okay, so if we run through the foods that are first class protein, I know obviously you've mentioned eggs and you've mentioned meat. So what are the other sources of first class protein?
Broadly speaking, meat, fish, eggs, and cheese. Okay. Now there's one or two others that need to be mentioned that are close to first class. Oatmeal is one, and soya may be one, and brown rice is notable in that it is a first class protein, but only the brown rice and not the white rice.
Okay, yeah.
However, the protein content of brown rice is really quite low.
Okay. So to summarize, it's really dependent on your 8-9 essential amino acids, and as far as I understand, the body absorbs those amino acids almost in a perfect ratio. And if one of those essential amino acids, which people don't really need to know what they are, but if one of those is slightly lower, then it's the limiting amino acid. So you almost, because one is low, you absorb less of all the rest. So
that's
then,
right.
So then your quantity is your quality is affected.
No, completely. And if we were to take a protein like beans, okay, so most beans will have a protein quality of about 50%. That means half the protein that's in those beans, and beans tend to be rather high in protein for a plant, half of the protein will be broken up and used as carbohydrate for the most part.
Okay.
And only 50% will be used for the construction of tissues in general and for the running of the cells.
Okay.
However, if you combine them, as we know, if you combine them with rice or wheat or another grain, then the protein quality comes up to maybe 70% or something like that. And that's a high protein quality. And you can use much, much more of the protein, both in the wheat and in the beans. And you can start creating tissue at a better rate. And as I say, that is a strategy that works. And it's used all over the world in all sorts of situations exactly for that. So that the traditional diets in many parts of the world combine these foods correctly to provide better protein to the people.
Okay. So then I suppose the obvious question is, so what quantity are we recommending for people? I know it's obviously depending on age, it's depending on activity levels, maybe depending on other factors. So what do people need to consider or think about when they're calculating how much protein they need?
Well, first of all, I'm going to go back to how they figured out whether how much protein you need. They would take people and put them in a laboratory and do protein balance studies with them. And that's all fine. But if you and I were to go and live in a laboratory for 6 weeks, all expenses paid, then you don't have to worry about a darn thing. The minute you start worrying, you're going to use more protein. It's called stress. Yeah. And people live different lifestyles and do different amounts of exercise. And yeah, their obligations are really quite different, and they have different relationships. All of these really require more protein, quite as simple as that. It's like saying that if you're doing a lot of exercise in the gym, you probably need some more protein. And there's one other thing in particular that requires you to have more protein, and that is getting older. As you get older, you need more protein. Now, this isn't fully accounted for in the official recommendations for protein, but people who study protein very much agree with that statement, that older people need up to maybe 50% more protein than younger people and can benefit from it. And we have a situation where if older people may not want to eat as much protein, and in many of the situations they find themselves in, for instance, if they're in care, they won't be getting that much protein.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, they could benefit from more. Now, there is a certain movement towards supplementing protein, which could be amplified, frankly. Protein supplements are becoming more popular because the study of protein has moved on beyond the official recommendations.
Okay.
And it's now evident that a higher level of protein has benefits. But I say to you, Jamie, that people who eat more, populations indeed, groups, nations that eat a sufficiency of complete protein, in my opinion, do better than where large numbers of people are on insufficient protein or the very minimum of protein, or who consistently eat incomplete protein. I would offer to you as a suggestion that if enough protein can be given to a country as a whole, then they're going to do better. Why? It's obvious they do better because their energy comes up, their immunity comes up, everything about their glands and their organs and their brain starts to function better. And that's what happens when you eat not just exactly a sufficiency of protein, but enough protein to support all of these activities at a high level. And that's where a recommendation for a higher amount of protein may come in. Add in exercise, and suddenly you can multiply your ability to use and function well with protein.
So traditionally, as far as I can remember, the recommendation for survival, you need a minimum of around 30 grams of protein. And
the minimum.
For a health point of view, it's up to about 80, isn't that right?
Yeah, and it's quoted in terms of grams of protein per kilogram. But broadly speaking, you could say 30 grams of protein. Now, Jamie, we have to explain to people who are not familiar with this that 30 grams of protein isn't 30 grams of meat.
Yeah, absolutely.
30 grams of protein is actually 120 grams of meat if it was just meat.
Yeah. Right?
Or it would be nearly 200 grams of grains if it was just grains. That is something like rice or bread. Yeah. So the protein content is maybe typically, if it was bread, it's going to be 10% of the weight of the food. If it's meat, it'll be 20% of the weight of the food. So that's what we're talking about. But 30 grams of protein is in or around the minimum. Now you can manage on 30 grams, but it should be complete protein at that point. You couldn't have 30 grams of incomplete protein, low-grade protein, and expect to survive on that.
Okay, so again, just so everybody's clear, so when you're looking at the label on your food, so maybe you pick up some steaks or a steak in your supermarket, there's going to be a protein quantity. So although it may be an 8-ounce steak, about 240 grams, 228 grams, whatever it is, and it's only about 20% protein.
There'll be 52 grams in that, about exactly. 20%. Yeah.
So it's really important because often when you're talking about these quantities, like you're saying, people think of okay, so if I needed maybe 80 grams of protein, I'm only going to get 80 grams of meat and I'm sorted, but that's actually not true. So maybe we'll look at even the quantities of basic foods just to give people an idea of how much protein is in each one.
Oh, yes. Well, meat, again, would be 20% protein, so that if you have, let's say, 200 grams of steak, then that will give you 40 grams of protein, just like that. Okay, so you might have that in the evening, let's say. If you have two eggs will give you in or around 12 grams of protein. Two large eggs will give you 12 grams of protein. Yeah?
Yeah.
And so people might have that in the morning. If they wanted to look at your protein nutrition, this is the way you'd look at it. A can of tuna will probably give you about 15 or 16 grams of protein. It's usually written on the can, depending on the size of the can. And milk is a very good source of protein. A pint of milk, I'm not saying that you should drink milk, by the way, but if we were drinking milk, a pint of milk would give you 16 grams of protein approximately. But the better way of getting the protein out of milk is as cheese or maybe as a protein supplement. Yeah. Cheese will give you considerably more protein. You might get 25% protein. So therefore 200 grams of cheese might give you 25 grams of protein. Sorry, should I say 50 grams of protein. And that's a very good way of increasing your protein content if that suits you as a food.
Yeah. So and it does vary quite a bit with cheese. It varies depending on maybe the fat content, for example.
That's right. Very fatty cheeses, such as cream cheese, have only a small protein content. And
the harder cheeses have a higher level.
You're looking at cheddar cheese, Emmental cheese, Gruyere cheese, that type of thing. Generally, will have about, if you had 200 grams of cheese, if you had 100 grams of cheese, then you will get 25 grams, maybe more, of protein in that. You might get 30 grams in some of the cheeses, depending on how much water is retained in the cheese. But then that also brings us into the area of protein supplements. Many protein supplements are made from dairy products, and very effectively. And so if that protein you have on the shelves in your gym, the Proform protein, one scoop gives you 30 grams of protein approximately. And that can be made up with water or with anything else, with milk, with coconut water, whatever you want. And you benefit from that protein. That's a very easy way of adding extra protein into your diet. The other easy way of doing it is to take some kind of a protein supplement in pill form, frankly, and amino acids, which are already broken down. They're not protein, they're the building blocks of protein already broken down, are a very, very effective way of taking in extra protein, and very efficient way too. You can also take in something like powdered desiccated liver, and that is maybe 60% protein. So it's a very high concentrated form of protein. There are also other protein supplements, such as like pea protein and all the rest of it. They are inclined to be lower in protein, and their protein in them is not as complete. But people use them at the same time. Whey protein is a high protein food. It's a very good high protein that we're not inclined to recommend for certain good reasons that we think are good reasons, but it is out there, and it is. Now, soya protein is another one that you can buy as an isolate, but ordinary soya protein that you buy can have the plant chemicals from the soya in it, such as isoflavones, and that we don't recommend.
That's right. Yeah.
So for those of you who are contemplating a protein supplement, that's a whole art in itself. But in terms of protein, then the idea of eating more protein. Now, just to say it to you, between complete protein and incomplete protein, the average man in Ireland eats about 100 grams of protein, believe it or not. But much of that can be incomplete and not very good. So if you increase the amount of complete protein, if you even increased it up to 100 grams, complete protein, that would make a difference over time in terms of body composition, energy, drive, endurance, and the functioning of everything in the body. So complete protein is a help from that point of view. Normally, I would say to people who maybe who are interested in their body structure and improving their body structure, being stronger, being more efficient, being, maybe having healthier bones, having healthier muscles, everything, to increase the protein maybe by about 30%, and to try to get complete protein to a much greater extent. Okay. That would leave you with 100, for a man, that would leave you with about 130 grams of protein. And you achieve that, a very good way of achieving that is just to take a protein supplement.
Okay. So we're looking at, first of all, is obviously the quality. So we're looking at really first class proteins, and then we're looking at the quantity. We're trying to get a minimum of 80 grams, and maybe for men up to 100 grams. So if you're training, we're looking at what, maybe about, I think it's pretty certain that it's a gram of protein per pound of body weight if you're exercising,
Well,
training.
yeah, a gram of protein per pound of body weight would give
Yeah.
you really a large amount of protein. Now, at that point, you're going to have to work at getting your protein in. You'd
Yeah.
have to eat maybe 4 meals a day where you were taking in a decent amount of protein.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is a good strategy for improving your body composition and for, building protein into the body. If you're interested in protein accretion as opposed to being catabolic, and most people are catabolic after the age of maybe 30 or so, they're going to be catabolic. They will be leaking protein unless they're good exercisers and good eaters. They will be leaking protein. And by the time they're 50, they've lost and leaked an awful lot of protein out of the body, and they have substituted fat in instead of that. So retaining protein and accretion of protein, is an interesting concept that people should take up. You need to hold on to your protein. And that's why we might go down to the gym and, our favorite approach then, Jamie, is obviously to lift weights intensively, put the body under stress once a week, each body part once a week for
20 minutes.
and then allow it to recover. So that, the stress is only applied for a very short period of time, and you get fit from that, and you develop protein accretion. It makes a noticeable difference in your body shape and what you look like, and it has a very good anti-aging effect, because that leakage of protein that we're talking about is the main thing that happens to accelerate aging.
Absolutely. So it's so important for somebody who's getting older to make sure that they increase their levels of protein. And that can be quite difficult because often when a person gets older, their appetite might tend to decrease. So they don't feel like eating a lot, which is a sort of it's almost a vicious cycle, isn't it? I mean, you're losing muscle, which lowers your metabolism, which means you don't feel like eating as much, which means that you eat less protein, which means you can lose more muscle. So
you have the whole story there, Jamie, and the whole business of appetite is all to do with the efficiency of your digestion.
Yeah.
And what digest your foods? What digest your protein? Proteins digest.
Proteins, yeah.
In other words, the enzymes that digest your food are made of protein. So if you are leaking protein, then everything gets less efficient. Your stomach cells can't produce enzymes at the same rate, your pancreas, etc., etc. They're less efficient. They're not able to digest the food, and your appetite goes down. You just don't want it.
Yeah.
Because people complain it sits there. Isn't that what they say?
Yeah.
Right?
Can't
So there
digest
are
it.
different strategies. Now, to be fair, there are other strategies for that you might use in naturopathic medicine. But the basic thing for the ordinary person is to consider how much protein they're eating, and are they filling up on foods that actually, believe it or not, by taking a lot of food that doesn't contribute to the protein economy, as it were. By taking a lot of that food, you can actually deteriorate the protein. In other words, you can change the balance of your hormones such that the protein tends to break down rather than accrete, as I say, rather than build up and be anabolic.
So one of the other things that we come across quite often is that people are doing their best to get into shape, and maybe they're trying to lose weight. So they're doing plenty of exercise, and sometimes they follow maybe a low calorie diet because it's been recommended for a long time that you have to really be conscious of your energy in and your energy out, and if you can change that balance, you'll lose weight. So what are the downsides of maybe doing a lot of exercise, for example? So you're putting in a lot of effort, but what can happen when you over exercise or you exercise large volumes?
Jamie, and none of us are immune from the idea that if you find a pick of fat on your tummy, you immediately want to go out and run a marathon to get it off. I mean, this is the way people think, honestly. But we try to educate people that it's to do with your hormones to a greater extent.
Yeah.
And the diet comes into it, but not as much in terms of calories as is normally put forward.
Yeah.
And here we have to tell the story of the dangers of low-calorie diets. That if you cut the calories down, that's fine. It will certainly work for you to lose weight. but you get flabbier because it doesn't help you retain the protein. Not only that, but I'm saying to you that if you lose protein, Jamie, and you, particularly if you're on a low-calorie diet, you will also be losing calcium, and you can be losing that calcium out of the bones at a very fast rate on a low-calorie diet that doesn't have enough calcium. So if you choose to go on a low-calorie diet, you had better have lots of calcium in your diet, and that should be food-bound calcium, such as is found in dairy products, and a small number of nuts and seeds would provide calcium, particularly sesame seeds, but they may not be just as easy to include in quantity in your diet, as you can appreciate.
Hard to digest.
So, a low-calorie diet shouldn't neglect really good sources of calcium, and you would have to have an abundance of calcium to counteract the calcium loss effect. Calcium and protein tend to go together from that point of view. If you accrete or accumulate protein in the body and you build up your muscles in that, you'll also be building up the calcium reserves in the body in general. Quite simply, your bones are made of calcium. If you accrete protein, if you build up protein, your bones will get thicker. Anybody who trains with weights will get a certain strengthening of the bones.
Yeah.
And that pulls calcium into your system and retains calcium. Not only that, but if you eat more protein in your diet, any kind of protein, it tends to pull calcium into your system. Just the protein alone tends to pull calcium in, which is quite the opposite of what's you'll read about, that protein causes calcium to be lost out of the body. There's a grain of truth in that. But actually, the more modern finding is that if you increase the protein, it has such a strong pull on the calcium that you absorb much more into the body and use it well as well.
Okay, cool. So a word of caution then for people following low-calorie diets, be very careful of, obviously not having a required level of protein, but then also calcium loss. And as you get older, that is particularly important, particularly when you're catabolic over the age of maybe about 25 or 27. So from the point of view of exercise then, what hormones are at play when you're exercising? We're obviously very keen on growth hormone. So maybe just explain, the positive side effects of exercise, and then maybe the downsides, and then when are the downsides going to outweigh the benefits or the positives?
Yeah, well, all protein is a stress on the body and has a certain breakdown effect on the body. All exercise, should I say, beg your pardon, all exercise is a stress on the body and has a certain breakdown effect on the body. But that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that slight breakdown effect so that you can recover and build up better than before. So that's exercise for you. But if you spin the exercise out over too long a period, then it doesn't work very well because it doesn't stimulate the growth hormones required to build up the body again. So the better, the more efficient way of exercising is to exercise for a short period of time. High intensity interval training is what they'll call it. And this can be achieved. If you wanted to go down to the Educogym, that's exactly what you'll be doing with people. There are other ways of doing it. You can run up the hill behind your house. That might do something for you if you have a hill behind your house. You could push your Mercedes up Hoth Hill or something like that for 10 seconds. And that would probably, provide a minute's intensive exercise, which would tend to bring up the hormones in the way that we would want. But what doesn't do it is lots and lots of extensive exercise. Now, I know you love going for a run, some of you, and you love going for a cycle, some of you, and that's all fine. And certainly you're going to be able to manage it because you'll find an equilibrium where you can do that. But repeated exercise of a very intensive nature, like Ironmans and marathons, that's really only for some people. I mean, there are some people who are going to be able to handle that. And you'll notice people like that, they have a certain glandular genetics, I suppose, that allows them to do that. The ordinary person that tends to have maybe problems with fat and that doesn't necessarily do well with that type of exercise. They do well with a more concentrated form of exercise. And when you get that stress effect on the body, the graduated stress of exercise, then over a period of a week or 10 days, you actually recover and you build up better than before. And also you can burn fat with that routine. And that's mediated by, as you said, something called growth hormone in the system. Now, there are systems for producing more growth hormone, and we use Amino for that. And there are systems that maybe doesn't depend on the growth hormone so much, but the adrenal hormones, testosterone, and for ladies, even progesterone can come up and cause a change in body composition as a result of that. Not only that, but your energy comes up, your drive comes up, your mentation comes up, your mentality comes up, and it benefits you on all kinds of levels. But that's the graduated stress. Now, the opposite could happen if you put the body under too extensive a stress. So we say we're going to train for the marathon. People train for that, and it can have a collapsing effect afterwards, because it's too extended a stress, and they don't have proper time, and possibly they don't have the proper nutrition resources to recover in some cases. So if you were thinking of doing that, then you'd probably need a little bit of special nutrition advice from somebody who knows about it, such as Jamie, or one of the people you've trained, Jamie, who would well be able to advise on that.
Yeah, so cortisol being the stress hormone that breaks down muscle tissue. So what will cause a person to release cortisol, and how does that work in the body when the person is exercising? And then just generally, actually, from a mental point of view, how does cortisol affect the body?
Stress and inactivity can bring up cortisol, for a start, but also excess activity, such as heavy training that you're not used to, would certainly bring up cortisol. It's normal to have cortisol rise after a training routine. Now, what they found in regard to gym work is that if you spend longer than about 20 minutes in the gym, you get a strong rise in cortisol. For instance, if you go down and you do 40 minutes or an hour, now you're into cortisol territory. Cortisol breaks down your protein and causes you to become fatter. So the exercise of choice would be to go down to the gym and exercise for about 15 to 20 minutes and cut it off then, because cortisol then is the fatigue hormone, and you don't allow that to come in at the same rate.
Yeah. So it's why we recommend that people train maybe short bursts, first of all, and then a certain number of times per week. So even 3 times per week is actually super beneficial, because you're conscious of producing lots of growth hormone, but also conscious of making sure that you keep your cortisol levels low, so that the net effect is a muscle gain as opposed to a muscle loss. So, and often we would come across people and they think, because they're kind of conditioned into thinking it's really going to be down to the volume of exercise. So the more exercise I do, the more fat that I burn, the more weight that I'm going to lose. And then often what happens is that they'll do maybe some gym sessions, and then they'll go do some running, and then they might also cycle, and they're almost training every single day. And the volume of exercise could be maybe an hour a day. And they find that they don't actually get the gains that they want. They're not improving. And very quickly you can identify it's down to the volume of exercise. And often the amount of nutrition isn't supporting that volume of exercise, because they're conscious of calories. Yes. So it can be a very exhausting time for them, because they're just doing so much. So and I think, am I right in saying, Martin, that your growth hormone production, it's probably around half an hour, 40 minutes where it tapers off. So there's an optimum level of training to produce the maximum amount of growth hormone.
Well, this is something that I can speak about. Jamie, you're obviously on your own territory there as you're talking about that, and you're explaining it very, very well. But in regard to the growth hormone, there are 2 ways of approaching nutrition and exercise. The common way is to get in protein directly after you exercise. And it's pointed out that your body can take up protein very well directly after exercise. Now, I'm sure that's true, but the trouble with taking any kind of food directly after exercise is that it tends to stop the growth hormone release. So if you're exercising for growth hormone release, you're probably better off waiting at least an hour and a half after exercise before you take any food. Then you can take food, and that would work very, very well. So it's the growth hormone that does the work. particularly of burning the fat.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we obviously, Jamie, we know that with Amino R, we have tricks to cause the body to effectively release growth hormone appropriate to the amount of exercise that you're doing. So if you take Amino R properly before your exercise routine, then you will release growth hormone, and then if you wait afterwards and don't eat immediately afterwards, don't have your latte directly after exercise, as I've seen people do, then you will get growth hormone and you will get faster results.
Okay, great. All right. So we're just going to quickly recap because I'm conscious of what time it is. But so effectively, as a person gets older, they're going to need an increase in the level of protein. And generally, people are going to probably benefit from increasing protein levels. Then if they're exercising, again, they're going to need to support the level of exercise that they're doing. They're going to need to make sure that they're, I suppose, making sure that the body is not breaking down muscle without recovering it. And so therefore, we're looking at sort of 80 to plus grams of protein. So, and I think it's well established in scientific literature that if you're doing some form of intensive exercise, you're taking about a gram of protein per pound of body weight. And then what we're doing is we're making sure that we're getting them from first class sources. So meat, fish, dairy, let's say cheese and eggs. And if any of those foods are lacking in the diet, either through intolerances or maybe even through personal preferences, then it's absolutely vital that people understand what second class proteins need to be combined to give a good level of protein, and to make sure that they're getting the right level of amino acids, because they're, as we know, they're essential, which means you have to get them from your diet. Good so far?
Jamie, what you're saying there is particularly important for people who want to be vegetarians or vegans.
Yeah.
And I can sympathize 100% with people that want to become vegetarians. The classic vegetarian, the naturopathic vegetarian, was a lacto-ovo vegetarian. Some of them maybe might have taken eggs, but they certainly accommodated the idea that you would take dairy products in the diet. Mm. And lacto-vegetarians then can do very, very well. I mean, with little knowledge of nutrition and incorporating the protein, the really good protein that's found in dairy products, yeah, into the diet, then they can do extraordinarily well. And you can do your training, you can do everything as a lacto-vegetarian. You just incorporate more dairy product protein in the diet. Now, there's a way of doing it, by the way. People say they're intolerant to dairy products, but there's a way of doing it that doesn't unbalance your body, and you can balance out the dairy products very well, even with supplements or with other foods, as a result of which you won't be allergic to dairy products.
Yeah.
Because most people, in truth, are not allergic to dairy products. They actually may have difficulties because their body is so far out of balance. You can cause problems with yourself. Now, it's beyond the scope of a talk like this, yeah, to try to teach how this would be accomplished. But I assure you that people who think they may have an allergy or an intolerance to dairy products switch it around and suddenly they don't. I'll give you a very simple example. If you constantly take yogurts, and I love yogurt, it's a wonderful food, but if you constantly take yogurt in the context of the type of diet that we would have here in Ireland, then you may find that you appear to be intolerant to it. Mm. But that's not a dairy product as such. That has a lot of lactic acid in it. And it could be the lactic acid is the problem.
Yeah.
So there's a way around all of this, and you wouldn't necessarily need to firmly conclude that you were intolerant of dairy products.
So then supplementation on top of that. So because often it can be difficult for people to maybe eat initially the required level that they need. So we're looking at maybe the desiccated liver powder. So it's about 2/3 a gram of protein per gram. Isn't that right? And then yes, we're looking at something like the Amino Energize that we do, which are free-form amino acids. And yes, there's 23 free-form amino acids in that formula. Isn't that right? With all the essential ones?
Yes, there's both essential and non-essential, yeah, amino acids. And there's some logic in supplementing both types of amino acid, yeah.
And we've got about a gram per, I mean, a
It's a
gram, one
gram,
of those is a gram, which is a gram of
1 gram
protein.
of protein in each tablet. Yes.
And then
Yeah.
we've discussed briefly, we mentioned the difference between whey and casein, because whey can often be a very popular protein. It's very well
Yes.
marketed and very
Very
well.
inexpensive. I mean,
Yeah,
it has to be said. Yeah.
it is the waste product of making yogurt and cheese. So you'll remember from your nursery rhymes. So and the unfortunate thing about whey is it's just not very complete. It has a low NPU, so a low level of the essential amino acids, whereas casein has a much higher level. And we've discussed previously in other talks just maybe even the different research on those different products. So obviously we could sell whey, we could have whey in the shops and in the gyms, but we choose to do casein because of the amino acids and the other benefits such as calcium, etc.
Well, Jamie, some of the wheys can actually come up quite high in protein score, and I wouldn't like to kind of say otherwise, just for some of them anyway.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they all tend to raise insulin. They have an insulinogenic effect, which is entirely independent of any sugar content, carbohydrate, anything like that. And that is, if you consistently raise insulin, then you're going to have difficulties benefiting from growth hormone.
Yeah.
That is the real problem with the whey approach.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's true, all right, that for a young person, they can play the whey game and maybe that their muscles might get bigger, but that is quite dangerous. If they persist with that, then the insulinogenic effect is going to get them eventually, and it'll stop their growth hormone. And it's almost like a stress crash.
Yeah.
Which happens after a few years.
Yeah, and whey does convert into protein very quickly, isn't that right? But the advantage of casein then is that anti-catabolic effect.
Most proteins that you eat, ordinary food proteins that you eat, generally break down slowly in the body and provide a flow of amino acids into the blood.
Yeah.
Now, to get that flow, you would need something that broke down fairly slowly. You don't need something that you take in and almost like blood sugar, but in this case, amino acids, it spikes up your amino acids massively, and then it all leaks out. And that's what's inclined to happen with the liquid whey protein.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were to take a casein supplement, it resides in your system much longer and provides this flow of amino acids for your cells. And they can use that flow very, very effectively as opposed to using a spiking effect.
Okay, great. So I'm just looking at my list of elements that we wanted to cover. So is there anything else, Martin, do you think, that gives a pretty concise overview of the importance of protein and then how to acquire it?
Well, as a general thing, I mean, look, if you want to do a fruit diet or something like that, I mean, that's all great, it's fine. But then learn how to eat a good diet after that. Yeah. And one of the elements of it would be to try and incorporate some complete protein at every meal. Okay, so meat, fish, eggs, and cheese or dairy products are the
sources,
the number one choices, as it were. But a very simple way of increasing your protein content is to take a protein supplement, and frankly, it's something that I find invaluable, and older people should consider it in particular. Because the right kind of protein supplement, as we're talking about, based on casein, will cause your muscles, even on its own, it'll cause the circulation to open up, because the casein has the unique property of increasing the amount of circulation promoting amino acids in your circulation, right? So for a good long time after you take it, your energy should come up because of the increased circulation, and also the flow of amino acids to your tissues will increase. And all on its own, it tends to cause this protein accretion in your cells. Not only that, Jamie, but you'll be aware that the casein was found to prevent breakdown of protein. And if we can harken back to the idea that older people tend to leak protein, then even a moderate amount of casein in the diet, in some form or another, tends to prevent that. So that's very beneficial.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, I think we've covered a lot